Hey, everybody, it's Tim Miller from the Bulwark here. Pope Francis died this morning on Easter Monday, born Jorge Bergoglio. He was the first Jesuit pope. Shout out to the Jesuits, first Latin American pope. And we are lucky to have our congressional correspondent, Joe Perticone, in Rome for a wedding. Weddings and funerals. You know, there's always a connection. How you doing, Joe?
I'm very sad, but very happy because it's my wedding. But then the sadness of learning about the death of Pope Francis, someone who I admire greatly, was a big shock, And I found out when I was 5 minutes walking distance from the Vatican, and so I was like, let's walk over. And we sort of knew, right? Like we knew beforehand because we're sickos who check our phones all the time. But most of the people there didn't appear to know. It was like not a lot of crowds because it was early in the morning. And then I started watching people and nuns, priests, tourists, you know, Jews, Muslims. There's tons of people there just as
Right.
tourists. And you start seeing people look at their phones, and then you see people gasp, and then you start seeing people like tearing up a bit. And then suddenly I turn around, and what was five people behind me was hundreds, thousands, a sea of people just all walking over to pay their respects, to wait, to see what happens. Um, so it was like kind of a shocking moment, but it was very powerful.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about the mood. I mean, reverential. You sent a picture to our Slack of a couple folks doing the rosary. A very familiar picture to Catholic schoolboy like me. But Catholics also, funerals are a mixed emotion with Catholics, right? I mean, you're going home to God. It's a little bit less of it's less dour maybe than in some funerals I've been to in some other faiths. What was the mood like in the square?
Because we were there, like right when it happened, there was just a lot of shock because he had been sick for a long time, but then he had really looked like he turned the corner. And this past week was Holy Week. So he was doing public events. He did the Stations of the Cross. We snubbed JD Vance and then met with him very briefly last night. And so there was, he drove in the Pope Mobile through St. Peter's Square just yesterday. So he was doing a
Oh
lot
wow.
more events. So people thought he had turned the corner. So it was not surprising, but I think the abruptness and especially the morning after Easter. And so here in Italy, Monday after Easter is Pasquetta, which is it's another national holiday. So there's not a lot going on. A lot of stores are closed. Um, so it was just like very, very sudden. People expected, if he was going to die, it was going to be in the same kind of dramatic fashion that the several months prior to him getting better were. They would be more expected.
Well, since you mentioned it, we have to at least do the brief on the rank politics of our Vice President JD Vance, having briefly met with him yesterday. If you have any elderly in your life, probably keep them away from JD Vance. JD tweeted this morning about how he got to meet the Pope yesterday, the day before his death. I don't know if there's anything more to say about that. Do you have anything else on the JD of the situation?
Here's a quote. So Vance was, I guess, wanted to meet with the Pope like any Catholic would, and JD Vance converted to Catholicism just a handful of years ago. And then the Vatican just said, no, you're going to meet with the Secretary of State of the Vatican. That's it. And Pope Francis then did his Good Friday Stations of the Cross, in which he gave a long series of remarks. One of them that stuck out to me, which you can read in Morning Shots, was a very obvious critique of the West and of the United States right now. He said, today's builders of Babel tell us that there is no room for losers and that those who fall along the way are losers. Theirs is the construction site of hell. And that really was another example of how Pope Francis was very critical of right-wing governments, of overly aggressive, um, discompassionate capitalist governments. And for him to be talking that way to the very end and then to give Vance a very brief meeting. This was just like an exchange of pleasantries. gave a couple Easter eggs for Vance's kids. He gave JD a pie or something and was just like, great. And the photos the Vatican released, he's sitting there like, and Vance is, giddy as anyone and any Catholic would be meeting the Pope. But Vance's politics and differ greatly. And Pope Francis is a huge, huge advocate for migrants, which this administration is um, an active danger to all migrants. And so the politics are there and they're going to be especially throughout the selection process for the new Pope, because
Yeah.
Pope Francis, people think, oh, there are so many conservatives in the American Catholic Church that they don't want another, progressive like Pope Francis. I don't think that's true. He's really remade um, the College of Cardinals in a way that very much mimics his idea that you place priority on the poor and on migrants. And so you might see a continuation of his style of leadership. If you look at the Preferiti, which is, the guys who they expect to be in the running, the final four to be the next popes, a lot of them are very similar to Pope Francis ideologically. And so if their personality is similar to his, which is very unafraid of very powerful people outside the church, you can expect that to continue, and you can expect a divide between, these very new Catholics like Vance who
Very new.
practice things that aren't Catholic at all, really. Don't really align with Jesus' teachings, and so the politics are still going to be there, and you're going to hear from a lot of them as this process goes forward.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the notes here. There's a very long, Pillar is just a very good Catholic media outlet that had a very long obit that I read this morning of Francis. And he really does position it as like, Francis was not like the radical left pope that like that the MAGA bishops in America like tried to make him out to be, like the very politicized American church, right? And we see this in a lot of, different areas. Denver, where my family, as my brother works at the Jesuit school, the bishop there, Archbishop, is extremely far right doctrinaire, pro Trump bishop. It's kind of like, what is that? It's a rather new thing, this influx in the American Catholic Church. But like, that is not really how Francis is seen. Obviously, he's not seen as a far right, and he didn't identify as that. And obviously, he focused more on the poor. Like, his changes around, giving a blessing to same-sex couples or whatever are like a lot more mild than what a lot of folks wanted to paint him out to be. And it was more about, kind of his focus on the poor and his image. And he came into, recognition as Archbishop in Argentina, like doing the, going to the slums, right? Like washing the feet of AIDS patients and, doing the types of lowering himself that is so counter to kind of this whatever faux masculine, faux tough guy, sort of element that we're seeing on the right. To that point, there is one other political kind of element here. Tom Homan, the immigration czar for Trump, went after Pope Francis not just a few months ago, saying I've got harsh words for the Pope. The Pope ought to fix the Catholic Church. And so, you are going to see, I think, a very kind of politicized treatment of this, from this White House and from MAGA world. I don't know if you have anything else on that.
Yeah, and you could have seen it on Thursday. Every Holy Thursday, Pope Francis visits a prison outside of Rome where he washes the feet of the inmates, which is a very symbolic gesture. Because back in olden times, if you didn't take care of your feet, you were as good as dead. And so now it's more of a symbolic thing of washing the feet. And he goes into these prisons every year, and this year he said, every time I come here, I ask, why them and not me? And at that same day, you had Republican members of Congress, even one who claims to be a practicing Catholic, like Riley Moore from West Virginia, doing the thumbs up pose at the world famous torture prison in El Salvador. And so there is that huge divide. I think when we look at the way that Pope Francis approached things, a lot of people liked to make him in their image. And so they would say things like, oh, he's this, radical liberal, or he's this huge progressive. That's sort of misreading the situation. When he would say, oh, I want to give blessings to LGBT people, or I, want women to be treated fairly. He wasn't saying, well, let's have some, purple haired woke priest now.
Right.
He
Well, we
wasn't
didn't,
doing
he
that. He
didn't
was saying,
change. There's no women in the priesthood
yeah.
now. Like there's like
And
a lot of things that didn't change. Right.
and most Catholics aren't demanding that. What
Right.
And he's just made it a more inclusive for, the worshiper, which is the most important thing. That's what affects the most people. And that's what stuck out to me. And the way that he's cared for the poor, like he made this quote. So right around inauguration time, I read this quote from Pope Francis where he said, when you give money to the poor, don't just drop a coin in their cup and keep walking. Stop and make eye contact with them. That's the more important thing you can do than anything. And when I was walking to the January 6th inaugural ball, which I wrote a piece about, there's a homeless man outside. Everyone was ignoring him. And I stopped and I gave him, I think it was $10, and I looked him in the eye and I was like, he's 100% right. That is much more meaningful. And then I went into the January 6th inaugural ball. That was another story. But
Were you making eye contact in there?
Yeah, like that eye contact was a lot more uncomfortable. But having like even the smallest amount, or calibrating the way you view the most vulnerable people, that was a huge theme of his message. And that was something that I think a lot of people, especially over in St. Peter's Square, where I just was, like, that was the vibe. Is that this was a very decent man in a very indecent period in history.
Well, I mean, he named himself. The Francis comes after St. Francis of Assisi, who's kind of a hot saint when we were growing up. But besides that, known for care of animals mostly, but really for society's outcasts, right? And that's like how he tried to frame himself. So did you get to hear the bells? Were the bells tolling at the St. Peter's Basilica?
Yeah, they do their like standard bells at 11 a.m. But they were kind of going off and on throughout the morning. I'm gonna try and head back there later this evening when the Camerlengo, which is essentially the Susie Wiles of the Vatican, will lay him in a coffin and well, a much nicer version of Susie Wiles, basically the chief of staff.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna try and go there. I'm expecting a much bigger crowd even than I saw this morning, because more people will get word, more people are gonna come in from out of town. And right now too is every 25 years in the Catholic Church, it's called the Jubilee. And
oh yeah,
it's a period where everyone floods to Italy. And so it's more packed in general, especially religious people. All the people on my flight, half, maybe 2/3 of them were just, church groups making the 25-year pilgrimage to Italy. There were huge groups, and you could tell. And so it's going to be really packed, and this is going to make it even more packed.
I did not realize it was the Jubilee. I remember the 2000 Jubilee as a Catholic schoolboy vividly. Anyway, Joe Perticone, well, give us more. If you get there later tonight, give us a little video of the scene. We can post it on the page here, and appreciate it. Congrats on the wedding, and thanks for doing a little work on your wedding week. All right, everybody else, subscribe to the feed. We got a man in Rome. The least you can do is subscribe to the feed. We'll be back here later today with more. See you soon.
Hey, YouTube fam, if you want to support the Bulwark, the best way to do it is by becoming a YouTube Bulwark Plus member. The Bulwark is truly independent. We have no corporate overlords. We're not settling any dumb lawsuits with Trump. By joining, you help support our work, and you can get a bunch of perks right here on this platform. Ad-free content, bonus videos, live streams, and some emojis of me, which I guess some people want. So come join, come hang out, become a Bulwark YouTube Plus member, and I'll be seeing you in the comments. So behave.